Welcome to a ride on the outside. MMA is full of people on the inside. But what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode number 6 of the MMA Outsiders. That's Zain Bando. I'm Tom Albano. And wow, I have to say, Zain, our episode last week, in terms of how fresh it was, it quickly went stale. Very quickly.
Yeah, it quickly went stale faster than you could even say the word stale, because after that episode premiered on Wednesday, literally all hell broke loose the following several days after that. We're going to get into that and a whole lot more, which was the madness of UFC 279 this past weekend. It took place at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. Originally, it was supposed to be headlined by Khamzat Chimaev and Diaz. Before I jump into that a little bit more, please make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow us on our social medias. They'll be scrolling across the bottom of the screen. And in case you guys forgot, I am a staff writer at bjpen.com. Tom is a contributor for Fansided MMA, so you can find all of our MMA work on those respective sites. But back to what I was saying, this card was originally supposed to be headlined by Khamzat Chimaev versus Nate Diaz. It was supposed to be, Nate Diaz getting sacrificed to the lambs, if you will. It was supposed to be Khamzat Chimaev's coming out party. Well, it was supposed to be Nate Diaz's retirement fight, so to speak. And it quickly turned sour when all of a sudden, me sitting on my couch waiting for that press conference to start. And Tom, I don't know if you were watching the Thursday press conference before it started, but there was this long 30-minute wait, and no one seemed to know what was going on online. And all of a sudden, Dana White comes out and he goes, "It's literally one of the nuttiest weeks I've ever seen. We've never had anything like this." And didn't get a ton of detail out of him until a lot more of it came out. They tried to do the 2-2s thing, and it quickly went south, effectively canceling the press conference. And at that point, no one really knew what was going on. So I just wanted to get your initial reactions, Tom, on what you were thinking as this was all happening. The MMA Outsiders Twitter account was obviously tweeting about it as it was happening. I was tweeting about it as it was happening. What were your initial thoughts as this madness was unfolding, if you will?
So at first, I wasn't too shooken up because when you said there was like a 30-minute wait, I was saying to myself, yeah, but you know what? This is always what happens with UFC press conferences. I shouldn't say always, but sometimes when we get a star like a Conor, a Nate Diaz, sometimes it can be a little bit of a wait.
Yeah, for the bigger ones, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe the press conference was supposed to start at, I think it was 6 p.m. Eastern. It ended up starting until like 6:30 or 6:45, somewhere in there. And kind of like you, kind of like what I thought. This is one of those things where it's like if you have a big star, you're going to expect them to be late. And sure enough, it looked like things were going according to plan. The Leech walks in with his brand new suit, or there was that picture that the UFC tweeted of him. I'm like, okay, this press conference is going to get started here in a couple minutes. And as it was getting started, everybody was all excited. Dana White walks in and shockingly he says, "This is without a doubt the craziest week that we've ever experienced." And everybody was taken aback, like, what was he talking about? And of course, the rest is history, I suppose. And as you know, I don't know how eerie you felt, but I felt kind of a weird feeling inside me when they brought out didn't they bring out Daniel Rodriguez?
Yeah, it was Holland and Rodriguez first. First, like they were going to be the only ones, and as it turned out.
That was a little bit bizarre, just considering how brief it was. It really didn't feel like we were getting a lot out of them. And then I don't know if you noticed, but Dana White's head of security, Brian Peterson, comes up to him, mouths him something, and you could see Dana say something like, "F it or forget it," and or enough, the press conference was canceled. And at that point, it was like, okay, something really weird happened. And then obviously it just kind of snowballed into the rest of Thursday and then Friday. And then Friday, that's when really all the madness started at the weigh-ins, especially with Khamzat missing weight by a significant amount. And which really, kind of as what you were saying, kind of really did leave a whole black eye on the entire card. And at that point, I wasn't sure what the UFC was going to do. I especially was not expecting them to just completely reshuffle the matchups. I kind of want to get your whole feeling on when you heard that Hamzat missed weight by that much. It was 7.5 pounds. Did you have any suspicions that okay, maybe this card is heading for disaster? Maybe it will end up getting canceled. What were your thoughts about it?
Yeah, so to go back quickly onto the press conference about it being canceled. So the footage eventually actually did come out, courtesy of the UFC themselves and ESPN MMA, and it just I don't know. You saw Holland and Chimaev exchanging words. You saw them trying to get after one another with security intervening. You saw the bottle throwing from Diaz, which, I mean, it's not the first time we've seen Diaz throw a water bottle at a press conference. But I don't know. I don't know if it was really enough to warrant a press conference cancellation unless there was more to that footage than was being let out.
Yeah, which could entirely be the case. We don't know that for certain, but initially when Dana White was saying those things, I'm like, oh, were there full? My first thought was, oh, there was a full blown fight. There was like a full blown literal fight in the back, and what was shown was nothing even remotely close to it. I mean, the closest we've gotten to a cancellation is maybe the second McGregor Diaz press conference, but that was to be expected. I mean, that was a rivalry entirely back drawn. They had fought once before. You knew where the bad blood was, but when you first heard that Kevin Holland and Khamzat Chimaev got into it, my first thought was that doesn't make
yeah. There's like, where is this coming from all of a sudden?
There's no storyline there. I'm kind of curious to hear, kind of Dana's thoughts. He claimed initially that Khamzat had like 50 people with him in his entourage. I'm just kind of curious as to your thoughts. My first thought was, how does the UFC not know that all of these superstars have these massive teams? I mean, you know that there are going to be some guys that are going to have dust ups, but it's like you guys know that these 6 fighters, and I'm not trying to put any of the other fighters down, but these 6 fighters entirely make the pay-per-view what it is, right? So you mean to tell me that you guys weren't prepared for any sort of chaos, especially when it comes to the Diaz brothers and their aura and that whole thing? That's the part that surprised me. And then I have to ask you this, because there's been some speculation online about this. I even put a poll out about this, and over 40% of the people said yes to this poll. Do you think in any sort of way that this entire thing was orchestrated or staged?
I want to say no, because I want to believe that, the UFC would be kind of above that. I want to believe that, the old expression, sometimes these things happen in MMA. Yeah, you're going to insert Strikeforce Nashville Brawl footage here. We're reminded that we're on live television.
Yes, that's true.
But
yeah,
I think it's...
Sorry,
I think that it's just weird, though. Well, I shouldn't say weird, because it is unsurprising that despite all the shaking up to this card, despite everything that happened, of course, the UFC goes and uses it for its pre-fight production. Like they used the freaking Dolly footage, what Dana White once called one of the darkest days of the UFC, for the lead up for Khabib versus Conor. In that
True.
same way, they used the footage for Thursday and Friday.
True. And did you also notice too? I don't know if you caught this part, but as you, I think you alluded to it online as well. And for those of you who don't know, Dana White had an immediate scrum with the media that was there right after it happened, and I don't know if you noticed, but Dana tried to pretend when responding to a question from John Morgan that he forgot that they used the footage from UFC 223. It's obvious what the UFC was going to do there. I mean, for anybody who's watched the UFC for a long time, they use that sort of thing to sell the event, and that's exactly what they did.
So I'm saying, if you don't mind, sorry, Zan, but if you don't mind, I want to pull something out of the Empty the Bench, like the show Empty the Bench here every Wednesday at 3 Eastern. I want to pull something from our files here.
Why the fuck you lying? Why you always lying? Oh my God. Stop fucking lying.
I would like to give that to Dana White. That is my response to that.
That's true. When does Dana White ever not lie at every single pre and post fight media scrum that you've ever seen?
Last week we talked about that Financial Times article, just how much of a businessman he is. Only in MMA can this type of businessman be welcomed and accepted.
No, that's true. But what made this whole day even more interesting was, and I'm sure you saw this, but did you see the scuffle that involved Darren Till, Kevin Holland, and a bunch of other fighters in the MGM Grand? They seem to be arguing about something. Apparently, it was before or after everything went down. That was the only footage that the world had until the UFC released their promo video essentially to promote Thursday and Friday.
Yeah, seriously, what the hell is going on with some of these guys like Chimaev and Holland and Till? I mean, Till already made an enemy not too long ago out of Daniel Cormier when he made that comment about Cormier's commentary being the Twitter troll that Darren Till is.
True. And I mean, it's hard not to think or notice that, of course, Darren Till would get involved in something like that, considering that Darren Till and Khamzat Chimaev are best friends.
Yeah, well, also, I mean, but it goes back to where you talk about that maybe a lot of this was on purpose, trying to stir it up. I mean, consider this: Tony Ferguson versus was going to be Tony Ferguson versus Li Jingliang, which ended up turning into Nate Diaz versus Tony Ferguson. But Ferguson, Li Jingliang, Holland, and Daniel Rodriguez were only made a few weeks ago, because this was supposed to be a one-fight card with Diaz and Chimaev. And I guess maybe the interest, and I will admit the interest was not there as much as, some of the other fights that we've had, maybe because we understood what the UFC was trying to do, as you mentioned before, trying to, Diaz was going to be the old dog and Chimaev was going to take him out back. But instead, all of this madness happens. And again, I'm not of the belief that any of this was staged, but, or any of this was pre-planned. Even the little philosophy that maybe Chimaev was told to miss weight on purpose. I don't buy that. But again, I think you get those theories when you make, a one-fight card, and then you have to add stuff last minute because you're concerned maybe about ticket sales or pay-per-view buys.
Yeah, and I was also going to mention that about, I would say, 12 days ago or so was the 10-year anniversary of UFC 151. And as many hardcore MMA fans know, that was the first ever pay-per-view to get officially canceled after Dan Henderson told the UFC on the last minute notice that he wasn't going to be able to fight due to an MCL tear, and they had to they had to destroy the entire card, and
Mhm.
it cost them hugely from a financial standpoint. That was the same week that Greg Jackson was called a sport killer and all of that. I can almost guarantee you that if this similar version of a card took place a decade ago, the UFC would have canceled it. I think now with all of the financial obligations that they have with ESPN to get their 42 shows a year, it's almost like no matter what happens, they have to put some sort of a product out there, no matter how good or how bad it may be, because they have to meet those obligations. And I
Yeah,
don't think 10 years ago it was the same thing.
I mean, I honestly, Zan got worried that after Chimaev missed weight, the main event of UFC 279 was going to be Tony Ferguson versus Li Jingliang.
Yeah, I was a little bit worried about that myself, but I'm like, given the star power of, I would argue, maybe 3 or 4 of the 6 guys, there was no way that they could build that as a pay per view and have everybody be happy with it. So I think that's why they went in the direction that they did. There's also an argument online that the 3 newly scheduled fights that took place um, were stylistically better than the originals. Do you buy that or do you not buy that?
I buy it. I buy it because we sat here and we said, Zan, not too long ago, that Ferguson versus Li Jingliang, that Li Jingliang was basically going to send Ferguson off potentially into the sunset, that it looked really bad for Ferguson. We
Yeah,
said that,
we practically he said that that fight was going to be one sided and terrible. Is what we said.
and we
Yeah,
said that Chimaev was probably going to get the win over Diaz because it's what the UFC wanted. And it's known that Diaz did not want to fight Chimaev originally. We now losing Holland versus Rodriguez, yeah, that was disappointing because I thought that was a sleeper for fight of the night. But I will say that I did like the 3 new matchups more than I did the 3 originally scheduled matchups. Now, that being said, I mean, we do have recaps of all 3 of those matchups, but overall, I thought it was a little bit better than what we were originally going to get. Now, I don't think that excuses this. I don't think that excuses somebody missing weight by 7.5 pounds. Like that, and the fact that it seemed like he didn't get fined because all of a sudden the matchups got rearranged, I think is disappointing. And I'll go as far as to say that I'm very glad Khamzat Chimaev did not get a post-fight bonus, even though he submitted Kevin Holland about 2 minutes, because, quite frankly, he didn't deserve it. Quite frankly, he didn't deserve it for basically playing catalyst to all the shaking up. You can argue all you want that it was better matchups, but what is it to say about somebody who plays a big role in the canceling of a press conference for the first time ever, practically in UFC history? Somebody who misses weight by 7.5 pounds and then smirks on the scale and then basically cuts a full blown heel promo the next day. Full blown promo the next day, basically going full heel, yelling who are on the day before September 11th. I mean, Khamzat Chimaev, you can say all he wants, and he is still proved he is, one of the better fighters in that welterweight division, but he left a bad taste in my mouth this past weekend.
yeah, I hear you. I'm going to counter that and say yes, even though he did miss weight by 7.5 pounds, that doesn't constitute the fact that no matter who he was going to fight on Saturday night, at least in my opinion, there's no way that he was going to walk out of the octagon having missed weight or not with the loss on his record. So in that sense, he did take care of business. But I think for a lot of people, the respect that they once had for him, they no longer now have, and he's going to have to get some of that respect back in his next fight, because if he pulls the same shenanigans again, potentially with a number 1 contender spot at stake, that will make him and his fan base look worse than they probably already are. But in the grand scheme, in terms of the landscape of that whole division, I don't really think it changes much.
How much though, Zan, is the UFC counting their stars that Leon Edwards pulled off that upset over Kamaru Usman last month now?
It's 100% now in their case the absolute perfect scenario, because now, assuming that this trilogy it's put on hold, the UFC is in a position now to make the dream fight that they've always wanted. Now they more than likely think that Chimaev has an easier matchup versus Edwards. This is a fight that was supposed to happen in December of last year, didn't happen, and now they have a chance to make a huge fight between a potentially massive superstar versus a guy who was losing the fight for 22 of the 25 minutes and happens to win the welterweight title. There's no better scenario now in the UFC's mind than what they currently have.
And if even if Chimaev missed weight, so maybe like you said, maybe he has to do one more fight now to get that title shot too, because he has to show that he can. But
I think he does.
That basically he has to show that he can make the weight, which is great for the UFC, because now maybe we do get that Usman Edwards third fight, and then if Chimaev's fight happens before that happens and Usman wins the belt back, you can run Usman Chimaev no problem. If Edwards wins that rematch or the fight or the trilogy, as you said, gets put on hold, Edwards versus Chimaev is open now. So Leon Edwards defeating Khamzat Chimaev has, like we said last month, it freshens up the welterweight division. And now, again, it's showing that, either way, the UFC is in a winnable position when it comes to booking the welterweight title picture.
Okay, well, going off of what you just said, about the welterweight title picture, I'm kind of curious. Dana White was asked specifically about the weight miss, and he really it doesn't seem like, or at least according to what he told the media, it doesn't seem like he's really sure what he's going to do with Khamzat next. But I think you nailed it. There really is one option for him, and that option is a really big fight with gold on the line. I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is mid-September of 2022. I'm just gonna throw it out there. I feel like with the way that the UFC has treated Leon Edwards and the way they made him wait for this fight, they are going to stiff him in such a way, and they are going to make Usman versus Chimaev for the interim welterweight championship, and from a sense, they're going to be praying that the fight is unbelievable, because they don't want Leon Edwards to fight someone who was previously in a boring fight. So I'm going to go on a limb and say they're going to put this trilogy on hold, and they're going to make Chimaev versus Usman with gold on the line, and the winner will fight Edwards at some point middle of the year, end of the year, or 2023. I just don't see now, with all of the stuff that's taken place, and I'm sure how much money that they've now made off of Chimaev, there's no way that in his next fight that they don't want him fighting for some sort of belt in his next fight.
Can I throw a wild card at you? A wild card into this title picture.
Okay.
I'd say maybe two wild cards, but one's been on a losing streak, so I'm not even going to count that. You know who that would be. That would be Masvidal, with the bad blood between him and Leon Edwards. But the big wild card I have, the man who most recently defeated Masvidal, Colby Covington. Covington versus Chimaev has not been done before. That is a fresh and interesting matchup that could run as a number one contenders bout or an interim title fight.
Yeah, but here's where I'll counter you that. Usman has already beat Covington twice now. Do you really think that the UFC wants to make Usman versus Covington 3, knowing that Usman's already up 2-0 in that rivalry?
But if you manage to run Usman versus Edwards 3 anyway, if that fight doesn't get put on hold for as long as we think it might, maybe then you run Chimaev versus Covington in a number one contenders fight in the hopes that Edwards does win or Chimaev wins.
Yeah, I mean, either which way you put it, no matter how you stacked the welterweight division. Pretty much our overall point is the next year at 170 is going to be straight madness given what we know right now. And Chimaev definitely made things a lot more interesting with his antics over the weekend and, beating a real stud in Holland who will fight anyone. And I truly think that Holland's stock has not gone down at all this week. I actually think he gained a lot more new fans, even with a loss, just in the way that he carried himself. Taking the fight when he really didn't have to. He didn't perform all that as well as the headlines suggest. He was quickly submitted via darts choke in the opening round. But I do think that the people who were Holland fans before on Saturday are bigger Holland fans now.
Yeah, Kevin Holland, I don't think should be penalized. I think there's a couple of fighters on this card that really just should not be penalized. Kevin Holland being one of them. That basically,
Li Jingliang being another one.
Right, we'll get to Li Jingliang. But Kevin Holland, he made weight for his fight. He got his fight shifted on late notice. Yes, Kevin Holland was part of that, scuffle from the press conference that caused the press conference to be canceled. But Kevin Holland did his job. He made the weight. He went into the octagon, and he ended up fighting somebody like Chimaev, who he had some bad blood with this week, and ultimately paid a price for it. But you got to give credit where credit is due. He took the fight. He ended up stepping up after Chimaev's little screw up. And Kevin Holland, the loss stinks, but there's going to still be a path for him towards, a higher welterweight ranking.
Oh, for sure. And I truly think that, as I stated previously, his stock did not go down at all, and his next fight, no matter who it's against, is going to be a big one, because he's deserved big fights for the last year now, and he's proven that he can stick with the best at 170 and, quite frankly, 185 too. So
definitely. All right, let's talk about that new main event that happened. So Nate Diaz versus Tony Ferguson. It's actually kind of the fight that once you heard Tony Ferguson was going to fight on the card, it's like, you get that sudden feeling, oh, we really could have had Nate Diaz versus Tony Ferguson. Well, not only could we have, we got it in a completely different circumstance, but we got it.
Yeah, we did. My initial impressions on the fight, I got to admit, and I don't really get emotionally upset while watching MMA, but this fight just made me sad. I mean, these two guys were, at the pinnacle of their careers just a couple years ago, and I think we got, an older version of what this fight could have been. Obviously, Diaz took care of business, winning in the fourth round of what, in my opinion, was a very close fight. But I just think, there were a ton of chances for Ferguson to win. He made absolutely one mistake after essentially dominating the fight with his lower leg kicks, decided to shoot in for a takedown, and it really didn't work. And I just truly think it was one of those fights where it showed, that these two, unfortunately, are nearing the end of their runs, and it's kind of showed through at the fight. Both of them were significantly more tired than what I expected.
But it was a Legends fight. It was by definition a Legends fight, because Nate Diaz obviously is going to be a future Hall of Famer. Tony Ferguson, he had a very long winning streak. He was interim champion, and unfortunately, he and Khabib never got to have their fight. But you never know if Tony Ferguson, if he had faced Khabib, or if he had faced even Conor after Tony won the interim championship in late 2017. If that one of those fights ever happened, does Tony end up becoming an undisputed champion? Unfortunately, we'll never know, but that doesn't take away from the massive streak and the brawls that he's had along the way that helped build his name.
Oh, for sure. And I know how we were talking last week that Chimaev versus Diaz was going to be a street fight. This quickly turned into a street fight very quickly.
Mhm.
These guys let their hands go, and they put on a fight for those people at T-Mobile. I think what's crazy to me, and I don't know if you caught this, but Dana White mentioned, I believe it was after the fight was over, someone asked him about refunds, and he goes, not only did no one refund their tickets, but apparently the day of the event, they sold 200 plus more tickets because they now knew that Diaz was fighting Ferguson. That's how loved both of those guys are, and honestly, they put on a great fight, and given all the circumstances that took place over the course of 72 hours, I really think that this main event was the main event that everybody was hoping for, and that's the main event that we all got, and
And it delivered.
it delivered. You got to tip your cap to both of them. But I wanted to ask you really quick before we dive into these fighters, kind of in depth, just knowing where they're at in their careers. For Tony Ferguson, him having that 12 fight winning streak, him being so close, so close to fighting for an undisputed championship, if that never coming to fruition, and now just this sudden losing streak of bad luck. That's now 5 losses in a row for Kukui. Do you think it's time for Tony Ferguson to retire? And if so, what do you think you'll remember most about him when you look back through his run that started on Tough 13 as a member of Team Lesnar?
I mean, he didn't take as bad of a beating as I thought he was going to heading into his original fight when he got booked originally with Li Jingliang.
Right.
But he has taken a lot of damage, and Justin Gaethje, the Michael Chandler fight, and that Justin Gaethje fight, he just has not looked the same since that fight with Gaethje in Jacksonville. And would I mind if he retired? Probably not. I think it would be fine if he retired. I think that fight with Diaz, kind of brought it up for me a little bit, that if he wants to have another fight or two, maybe, but you would probably have to restrict those to, similar style Legends fights, or you could also with the UFC do the old dog, passing it down to the new dog. But I don't know if I want to see Tony Ferguson take damage from somebody who's young and skilled and is an up and comer. I don't know if I want to see that. I want, Ferguson lost to Oliveira easily. He lost to Beneil Dariush. Chandler kicked his head off. I think as far as Tony Ferguson goes, maybe one more fight if there's a Legends fight they can do. If Money Mac comes calling, because Money Mac is also on a losing streak, maybe you run that one.
And that's honestly a fight that could get Conor McGregor back to his winning ways. I'm not trying to discount Tony Ferguson by any means, but if you're looking for a guy who's gonna stand and trade with you and has had his chin compromised, no offense, but look no further than Tony Ferguson himself. That's a fight that Conor McGregor, I think, would be clamoring for if they offered him that. And I think it's one of those fights where Conor could easily win if he prepares the right way. But what I'll remember from him is, I was watching like an overview of his entire career, and I watched the entire breakdown of every single time that the Khabib fight was canceled. And what blew me away looking back on it was that at that coveted UFC 229 show when Khabib beat Conor, Tony was on the same card, and it just blows me away that Tony Ferguson was the interim UFC lightweight champion, and at the time, whatever you want to call it, Conor didn't have his belt anymore. But what blows me away to this day is how the UFC didn't make Ferguson versus McGregor when Ferguson was the interim champion, and that whole division was in limbo. I just think in some ways the UFC had so many missed opportunities to make it right for Ferguson, and they just ultimately didn't, and it ultimately, cost him what could have been one of the biggest runs in the history of 155. And there's no doubt that Tony Ferguson is easily, and I think you go as far to say this, he's easily the best, if you could even call it this, the best UFC interim champion that the company has ever had. And it just blows me away that Ferguson never got his due. And I just feel like, was the fight meant to be? I think in some ways, yeah. But what's truly unfortunate is the biggest UFC lightweight title fight to have ever taken place, arguably, never happened. And that's the real sad part, because we didn't really get a chance to see who that true number one guy was, and it could have set off a firestorm of arguably the greatest 3 fight set we've ever seen.
I'll take it one step further on that one, Zan. That UFC 229, obvious reasons, we only talk about Conor and Khabib. We always mention them. We always mention the incidents that happened afterward, but kind of took away from a co-main event. Like you mentioned, Ferguson was on the co-main event of that card, and he and Anthony Pettis just lit each other up in a spectacular fight that the doctors had to stop and give the win for Ferguson. As far as Ferguson, what I'm going to remember most, if this truly is the end, I would remember him really catching my attention November of 2016, a week before Conor won the lightweight title. He had a 5-round fight with Rafael dos Anjos, Mr. Ferguson, and he displayed incredible amount of showing. He held his ground, and he just had his way with him. Wasn't a complete sweep in my eyes, but for most of the fight, it was the Tony Ferguson show, and that really stood him out and basically solidified him as a top star at lightweight, even if he hadn't held interim gold, let alone any gold at that point.
And he also beat a former lightweight champion in the process.
Exactly.
So there's that. Well, I have a cool story too, because I was lucky enough to be in attendance to watch him beat Donald Cerrone in Chicago. And when I saw that fight, I'm like, if this guy ever fights for a title, for an undisputed title, it's gonna be something. Not knowing, that the 10 UFCs later, everything would just blow up. But I truly think his run is something to behold. It's one of the best runs to the top that I've definitely ever seen. And if this truly is the end, this guy was a hell of a talent. And he did take a lot of damage, but he was one of those guys that would fight anybody, anywhere, anytime, any place. And he went out on his shield, and you have to give him a lot of credit by him stepping in and some of the best in the world, and doing all he could. So if this is the end, he really did leave a great mark on the sport. And as for Diaz, he really did solidify, his legacy as one of the UFC originals, and one of the guys that, really did help build the company, even if he didn't win a world title. And he was just in a lot of great fights, and it just felt like a culmination of 2 careers, going side by side, and eventually colliding. And I just feel like it was a great way, if it was the end for both of them, to really cap off, 2 storied careers. It'll be interesting to see, what Nate Diaz does next. Obviously he did start his own promotion. He did start Real Fight. He did tell Joe Rogan that after he, gets it off the ground, that he would love to come back. And honestly, if he does come back, the one fight that he needs to come back for is the inevitable trilogy against Conor McGregor. If he's still there, that's the fight that needs to be made. I feel like that chapter of that series has not been closed yet, and that's a fight that I would still very much like to see if both guys won it.
Yeah, I would say it's pretty open when you have this post-fight promo where Nate Diaz threatens to go take over boxing and show his fellow MMA fighters how it's done, because Conor McGregor couldn't, and then Conor responding afterwards in a quote tweet. That bad blood is still there. That trilogy, I think, should really happen. Whether it happens inside of the UFC or outside of the UFC. But also, if this really is the end, I think it's a spectacular way for him to go out. If Nate Diaz should never fight in the UFC again, hell of a way by having a war with Tony Ferguson and scoring a submission in the 4th round, showcasing why Nate Diaz is spectacular on the ground. And I think this was a lot more fun of a main event than we would have gotten with Nate Diaz versus Khamzat Chimaev.
Oh, and Kurt, one other thing I would say about Diaz versus McGregor 3, that potentially taking place. You had said that it needs to happen no matter if it takes place in the UFC or outside. I don't think the UFC can afford to watch that rivalry end in another promotion. I think they need to do everything they can to make that fight, as people have asked for that fight. Dana White has said publicly that fight is still there. They need to do everything they can to make that fight when both guys are ready to do it and offer them serious money to do so. And I think now it looks more inevitable than ever, because if you look at where Conor McGregor is, just losing to Poirier in back-to-back fights, having not won a fight since Cowboy Cerrone in January 2020, what other fights make sense for him at this moment other than Nate Diaz? There are very few, if none at all. That is the fight that is the only fight. That is the fight that has to get made if you want that chapter, that story to end right here, right now. And if it's going to happen, it has to happen in the summer of 2023, or else it will never happen. So
I mean, as far as to answer that question of whatever fights, I mean, I've been the championing for Conor McGregor versus George Masvidal, but UFC doesn't seem to like that. Dana still doesn't seem to like that. And if it is true that Masvidal and Burns are going to fight at the end of this year, and Burns beats Masvidal, Masvidal's stock is completely destroyed, and it would not be any acceptable.
If it isn't already, I think it already is.
Okay, fair. If it isn't already, again, we mentioned Conor versus Ferguson. Maybe that's tempting, considering it was the fight that could have been. But the fact that it's the fight that could have been is kind of disappointing in itself. Conor versus Michael Chandler has been teased, and maybe that would be fun. Maybe at least fun if one of them gets a spectacular knockout of the other. But really, the fight that makes the most sense at this point, especially if the UFC and Dana are just so adamant about not doing Conor versus Masvidal, would be Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz 3, especially when you consider both of them are 1 million pay-per-view buy guys. Like, there's a chance. I don't know if I would say there's a chance that it would top a UFC 229. I don't know if I can say for certainty it would beat UFC 229's record, but I would say there's a good chance of it.
No, I mean the reported number for McGregor Poirier 3, I think, was around 1.8 million.
Yeah.
I think that a Diaz trilogy fight could do somewhere in that ballpark, if not a little less, more than 1.5, 1.6. Tons of people, even the casuals. I'm sorry, I'm using that word super loosely. Even the casuals would be excited to see that trilogy get and back again. So I really hope, for the sake of the company, for the sake of the fans, for the sake of this show, to be quite honest with you, because we're trying to call our shot here, this is the fight that needs to get made, and it needs to happen next year if they want to somehow keep Nate Diaz around and make Conor McGregor their golden goose happy. So yeah, there you go. That's the fight that needs to happen next, and I don't care what weight it takes place at 155 or 170. Sign me up for either. But to counter that, if the UFC doesn't really like Masvidal versus McGregor and they end up making Diaz versus McGregor at 170, shame on them, because that also means that
Dana would be a hypocrite.
Right, that somewhere down the line you guys really like that fight, and all of a sudden, because of your narrative or whatever the hell you want to call it, you guys decided, That's what they're more than likely going to do. They're going to consider that, and they're going to turn around and say, "Oh yeah, we're just going to make a Diaz McGregor 3 at 170 because we've done it before."
Why?
So, yeah.
Because fuck you. That's why.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Speaking of FU, I mean, this whole week was a big FU to Li Jinglang. I mean, he shows up in his dapper suit at the press conference. It gets canceled. He goes into his weigh-in, successfully makes weight, gets shifted over to Daniel Rodriguez. Yeah, it's a catchweight bout. So actually, he was competing at 170, and now he's fighting somebody who's weighing in, just under 180, and by fight time is well over 180. Then Jing Lang ends up going to war, losing a controversial decision, and now, as of September 14th, today, he is out of the UFC welterweight rankings, replaced by Daniel Rodriguez. This guy just got, regardless if you thought Jing Lang won or Rodriguez won, this guy just got the most, shift to him. Like, really? That's such disappointment.
You sure did. Not trying to toot my own horn, but I did go 5-0 on the main card, including correctly picking Daniel Rodriguez to beat Li Jingliang. But as I was watching this fight, just like 90% of the MMA community, I did not score that fight for Daniel Rodriguez. I thought Li Jingliang won clear as day. He hurt him several times. He had a chance to win that fight on several occasions. You could argue that Rodriguez was going for more, was trying to do more. But even if you look at the significant strikes and all of that, pretty much every single category went towards Jing Lang. And I really don't know, what fight those judges were watching. And even and even Dana White said that he was shocked when he heard that it was a split decision, and rightfully so. I'd really like to see a rematch between these two. I think it was a fight that frustrated a lot of people. And as you said, Jing Liang, really got the short end of the stick this week. He got really, no love from the media or the fans because, his fight was being entirely overshadowed by the top two new fights. And, they went out there and they put on a show, and, truly, I feel like, he deserves a little bit more than what he got, and he certainly should have won this fight hands down.
And he got booed just because he wasn't American, because it was a very pro USA crowd, and they just booed the Leech. How do you boo the Leech?
Yeah, and how do you boo a guy that was probably the best dressed dude at the press conference before the press conference was canceled? You just don't boo him. And even worse, he was practicing his English to show to the world, and he couldn't even show that.
Frustrates me what happened with Lee this weekend. Other UFC 279 highlights. I mean, got to give credit that to Irene Aldana for quite possibly the strangest upkick in the history of the UFC.
Yeah, have you ever seen a liver kick from the bottom to knock somebody else out? Because that was the first time I had ever seen any sort of variation like that ever. And I've been watching MMA for close to 20 years, and I could not believe what I was seeing.
I mean, you can argue, you can say it was a lucky kick. You can say that, yeah, maybe the kick landed directly where it was, but it takes a amount of skill by Aldana to do those up kicks.
I mean, that was a natural instinct kick. There was nothing lucky about it at all. But in real time, I thought that Macy Chiasson initially broke her rib. That's
what I thought at first.
That was my first reaction, and then I saw the replay. I'm like, oh my goodness, he just knocked her out with the liver kick from the bottom. I couldn't believe it. That was ultra impressive, and wow. And I'm not trying to go too deep on this card because there was a lot to take in on this card, but holy shit, the Chris Burnett Jay Collier fight was unbelievable.
Probably my favorite fight of the night. I have to confess.
That was a tale of two different fights in one fight. And Chris Burnett, he just has this magic about him where he never goes away. And it's crazy to think about it. He was a plus 360 underdog. He was the highest heavyweight underdog in close to a decade, and he still won.
He still won, and even though he missed weight, I can be stingy about fighters who miss weight, but then like the show that he put on and the freaking celebration that he has, who doesn't love Chris Barnett?
Yeah, I agree. And you got to give Jay Collier a lot of credit for hanging in there. But I gotta say the officiating job in that fight, especially near the end, was very questionable. I thought that fight was stopped way too late.
Yeah. There were a couple of points where the fight could have ended, but I don't think it takes away from the fight that they put on. Also, got to give credit because all of the main card, 4 of the 5 fights ended up having a finish. Johnny Walker, I thought he was going into that Ian Cutelaba fight, and I thought he was getting power shotted to death. Instead, Johnny Walker managed to pull out a submission, and now it looks like, hopefully this for Johnny Walker is the fight that he needed to get back to that winning pace from circa 2018, 2019. Where it looked like maybe he could have been fighting John Jones eventually.
I think this is the win he needed as well. And in almost every pre-fight interview, he's like, "There's no way I'm going to lose this fight. I've trained super hard for this." And he went out and he put on a show. And I couldn't believe it, and I also couldn't believe at the end of the card, looking back on my picks and noticing that I believe I started 2-5 for the evening and ended up finishing 5-0 in the in card without even realizing it. And I'm kicking myself because this is one of those cards that I actually sat out and did not place any bets on this card this weekend.
Oh.
And I'm kicking myself just a little bit because I'm like I can't imagine how much I would have cashed in if I had done just a methods parlay. But you live and you learn. I think a lot of people had similar nights where they were probably kicking themselves a little bit. Especially in case you didn't know this, there's a Barstool personality that had a chance to take a $10,000 cash out last night. He had a couple of UFC legs, including the Daniel Rodriguez fight against Li Jingliang, and he had the Broncos to cover. And sure enough, the Broncos lost, so he lost his bet, and he was scrutinized for that. So thankfully, I was not one of those people. But yeah, it was a very interesting night for a lot of people who pick fights, and one of those nights that people won't forget just because of the sheer craziness that was UFC 279. But that isn't the only big Las Vegas fight that's going to be taking place in the month of September, because we also have a big-time boxing match this weekend on DAZN pay-per-view. We have the long-awaited trilogy between Canelo and Triple G. Are you down? Are you down to see this fight, or is it too little, too late in your opinion?
I'm still down to see this fight, but it's not as big as what it should be. Because honestly, it's like, we thinking of all the stuff with UFC, and it's like, oh yeah, Canelo versus Triple G is happening this month. Meanwhile, compared to their first fight in 2017 and their first fight in 2018, it was just like the obsession of the weekend, each weekend. It was the obsession of, can Canelo defeat Gennady Golovkin? Which one of these two is the best at middleweight? And now since then, both have moved to super middleweight. Canelo's lost a fight. Triple G hasn't looked the same as his 2018 self. Triple G ended up having a fight in 2019 that he basically arguably should have lost. So these two have kind of, I don't want to say, yeah, maybe they lost a little bit of a step. That this fight certainly lost a step. That it should have been, in 2019, and it should have been, one of the biggest boxing pay-per-views of all time. And instead, it's stuck on the Zone pay-per-view. Both guys have lost a step. Canelo coming off of a loss. This kind of disappointing because this fight should be a much bigger deal than what it is.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited to watch it. I've watched the first two fights, obviously, and I watched both of them as they happened, of course. And as you said, this fight doesn't feel as big, now. This topic hasn't been brought up in probably a couple of years, but it just feels weird. HBO is out of the picture, or now, like there just seemed to be this really big deal around these two fights, and it doesn't feel the same. Now it's on its own pay-per-view. You have Eddie Hearn promoting the fight. It doesn't feel like how it should. And especially for the people like you and I that maybe watch the Zone a couple times a year, it just doesn't feel like one of those fights where people should be forced to shove a lot of money to see it. But I can guarantee you that T-Mobile Arena is going to be packed. Canelo's fans travel well, and I'm sure you'd agree with me. This is going to be a pro Canelo crowd come Saturday night.
Very much so.
When do you agree with that?
I would certainly agree with that. And I would say this is a fight that, well, what would you say that this is a fight that Golovkin has to win? Because Golovkin looked like he won the first fight, and we got the very controversial 118-110 Canelo card.
Yeah,
and
that
was
horrendous.
That is I think that is the worst fight. That is the worst scorecard I've ever seen in a fight. And then next year, Triple G arguably could have won again, but instead Canelo ends up coming out on top. So is this a fight where Triple G has to win?
Yeah, Triple G has to win this fight. And not only does Triple G have to win this fight, he has to do everything he can to finish Canelo. Because I just feel like if this goes to a decision again, the cards haven't played in his favor the first two times. What is there to say that the cards are going to play in his favor this time? I just simply don't see it. And as a matter of fact, you said that 118-110 is the worst scorecard you've ever seen. Are you sure it's not worse than the Pacquiao Horn decision or the Pacquiao one decision? Or are you convinced that Canelo Triple G won that 118-110?
I'm convinced. 118-110. That's a 10 rounds to 2. That fight was not that Canelo one card, Canelo Triple G one card. Well, that was not even close to 10 rounds to 2. I think if I remember correctly, that first card, I had it 8 rounds to 4 in favor of Golovkin. It was and I think one or two of those rounds could have been very evenly scored. Like it could have gone in Canelo's favor. Like that was a close fight. That is in no way a 10 rounds to 2.
Yeah, I had it 115, 113. Somewhere in there. I also had it for Golovkin, which made it even more shocking. But yeah, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier. Yes, this is a fight that Golovkin has to win. But I think more importantly, this is a fight where Canelo's back is against the wall. I mean, he just lost to Dimitri Bivol, and he had a chance to really set up this mega fight with Golovkin, and now it doesn't feel as big, as considering that he and you can, I mean, even wrong, but just considering that he doesn't have all of the belts anymore, it doesn't feel the same as what it should be. Where these two are the two as undisputed guys in their weight category, and it really does not feel as big. If you were to give me a prediction, I would say Canelo wins this fight via decision. If you were to give me a bet on this fight, I really would like this fight to go over 7.5 rounds. Just considering how the first 2 fights have gone, and I just don't think Golovkin has the power that he once had previously, and I think Canelo is just going to outbox him, and I think he'll leave Vegas with the win, and I think he'll leave Vegas having won 2 out of the 3 fights. That's what I think.
Yeah, I'm thinking with how Golovkin basically, he's fought earlier this year, but that was his first time he had fought since the end of 2020. Considering Golovkin is going to be facing a tough crowd that, like we mentioned before, is going to be very pro Canelo. Canelo is probably going to have the edge this whole weekend in terms of the mind games. Canelo has the belt, so Triple G is going to have to do everything, kind of like you mentioned before, to finish Canelo and leave it out of the judges' hands. I've got a feeling, though, this one's going to go to the judges again, and I've got a feeling they're going to give it to Canelo once again. So I think this one could be trouble. And Zain, going on that thought of Canelo's back is against the wall, Triple G needs to win this fight. Could you see it being, you think of that old stipulation, the loser leaves town, but obviously if this fight lives up to what we think it can still be, that, both of these guys can still go. So you can't say loser retires, but do you think whoever loses this fight is going to have a much significant setback in their career that it's going to take a lot of work to get back to?
It's a good question, and I really do think it depends on how the fight goes. If this is an action-packed, back and forth, them trading rounds, it being a super close fight, I would say no. But if someone, of either guy somehow gets viciously finished in this fight, which I really don't see that happening, then maybe their stock will take a huge hit. But no, these 2 guys are still great for the sport of boxing, and no matter what happens, people are going to be entertained, and it's one of those rivalries that has a lot at stake, and they're both 2 of the best at what they do, and I think this fight is inevitable. It was going to happen eventually, and this is when it's going to be. And thankfully for boxing fans everywhere, the UFC card is not as big as it was a week ago, so you're not going to have as many conflicts from a combat sports perspective on waiting for this fight to start, because it's going to start when it will, and it's going to be a great fight. And I think just throwing it out on a whim, but don't be surprised, just given the story of this rivalry and the wild twists and turns, don't be surprised if we have another controversial decision come Saturday that people are going to be talking about for years to come. Oh, I'm just throwing it out there. It might happen, and a lot of people are going to be very upset if it does.
120-108 Canelo. I'm calling it now. That's not my scorecard. I'm saying that is going to be the scorecard that causes controversy.
It's going to be something or where the judges are going to make it look like either Canelo or Triple G won every single round, which is obviously not going to happen. And if it does literally somehow happen, I think you, myself, and thousands of other people are going to be on our couches floored with what we're seeing. But to conclude, I think it's a big fight. I think it's a fight where if you haven't bought a pay-per-view all year, this is the fight to get, especially if you've seen the first 2 fights previously, and it should be a fun one, and T-Mobile should be packed Saturday night, to say the least.
For sure. I want to get your thoughts going back to UFC for just a second, Zain. Dana White saying that no fighter got a pay raise for all the fight shifting. 1, do you believe him? And 2, is it really right to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think he was hinting that that's where he was going, but knowing Dana and knowing how little he clues the media in on any of this stuff, I highly doubt, considering how Dana sees fights and stuff, that this really did happen. I'm pretty sure that Dana would have offered these guys significantly more money to take these fights last minute. And according to Nate Diaz, he lost count on how many how many more millions of dollars he got for his rescheduled fight with Tony Ferguson. So no, I don't believe him for a second that nobody got to pay a raise. I'm pretty sure that the guys involved in this whole thing it got what Dana felt that they deserved, and no, I don't buy the narrative for a second that he didn't give them at least a little bit of a pay raise.
So I actually agree with you, because if he was willing to help Chris Barnett, who missed weight but put on a show, he wasn't eligible for post-fight bonuses because he missed weight, but he said, I'm going to take care of him. I would hope he would take care of his, 6 fighters who were headlining the card and had that whole scuffle and shuffle. So I say one more time.
Why the fuck you lying? Why you always lying? Oh my God. Stop your fucking lying.
It's true, and I'm pretty sure that people who saw that they probably spun it into something that it wasn't. As Dana likes to say, you guys like to write about this stuff for clicks. And I'm sure that there were plenty of outlets, no names mentioned, of course, that probably took that and spun it into something that it wasn't. And I feel like this is another one of those. This is another one of those things. I want to ask you one other thing, and I don't know if you caught this, but the Best of MMA YouTube channel. I'm not sure if you're clued in with what they like to do every day. It's like a 13-minute summary of all the news that took place in MMA from that day. A lot of people don't like it because of the monetization. People like myself kind of do like it because it is a one-stop shop to watch everything. I'm kind of curious. They included a clip, I believe it was yesterday, meaning Sunday or Monday, that included a TikTok video of Khamzat Chimaev being called into a private meeting with Dana White after his win over Kevin Holland and his team. Apparently, from the video, it appears that his team wasn't allowed into the room. We obviously can't really say what took place in that meeting, but just out of curiosity, do you think Dana was disappointed in Khamzat? Would you guess that Dana was impressed with Khamzat's performance? Would you guess that Dana asked him, maybe he was thinking of switching weight classes? Knowing what we know and knowing the information that we've gathered for the last 4 to 5 days now, if you were to guess, do you think that meeting was a good meeting or a not so pleasant meeting?
I would say it is the disappointed father style meeting. I would say he was, let's say he was probably very angry inside, but I don't know if it was the kind of meeting where Dana would raise his voice and curse at him. But basically, I could see it being a meeting of, hey, good fight. I don't think about the weight issue yet, because obviously he competes at 2 weight classes and Dana's not the kind to make decisions, all of a sudden on the fly without, like this was the first time Chimaev had weight issues, but pretty much I could see this meeting being Dana, getting very close to Khamzat Chimaev's head and saying, don't ever do any of this shit again. And I don't blame him.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if that meeting was 5 minutes and he was done. And one other final UFC 279 topic. There was a video that came out also after the fight that showed John Kavanagh and Johnny Walker being kicked out of the T-Mobile Arena after Johnny Walker won. He also had no shoes on him getting removed from the building.
I found that so weird. I
find it extremely weird too. I don't think it makes any sense in terms of what the UFC is claiming is their COVID-19 practices, considering that their COVID-19 practices have really been anything but normal from what we know. I think it was a very bizarre thing that hopefully, in my opinion, and then what I hope happens is hopefully whoever told them to leave gets fired, because that just doesn't seem right. They have a fighter's row for a reason. The guy just won. He took no damage. He doesn't have to go to the hospital. Let him sit and watch the rest of the card, just like everybody else.
I agree. Something doesn't add up there.
No, I agree.
Another boxing fight, by the way, that is of particular note. We've been talking about it for a couple of weeks now. Jake Paul, Anderson Silva had that initial press conference. Zain, are you not going to invite me to your barbecue like Anderson Silva was apparently? Anderson Silva and Chael Sonnen apparently haven't had a barbecue yet.
Yeah, and for those of you guys who aren't aware, it goes all the way back to their rivalry from about 12 or so years ago. You can look into the research on that yourself. We don't want to delve way too much into it, but from you to me, of course, if I was hosting a barbecue or you were hosting a barbecue and you invited me to your barbecue, of course I would show up. So yeah, I hope that they buried the hatchet with that.
It seems like they have.
It seems like they have, and I really do hope that at some point this barbecue does take place, because I feel like they've blown over the rivalry, and I just thought it was hilarious and cute in such a way, Anderson Silva, to ask Chael why he hadn't come to his barbecue yet. And what was even cooler about it was Chael Sonnen's response of why he hadn't come. If that isn't typical Chael Sonnen, then I don't know what is. But yeah,
I loved Anderson's add on too. Like, oh, don't go to Brazil. We'll do it here in America. Everyone in Brazil wants to kill you.
Yeah, that was the funniest part. I have to ask you this: Jake Paul is trying to place more bets, as he likes to do with his opponents. That if Anderson Silva beat him, he would get a spider tattoo. Do you think that this bet will actually come to fruition? And my second question to you is this: Do you think that Jake Paul is being a fanboy towards Anderson Silva and not taking this fight as seriously as he should, or do you think that Jake Paul is just putting on his act like he likes to do to get people talking about him again?
It's an act. I've assumed that everything that Jake Paul does at this point is an act. And as far as the bet goes, I mean, why don't we just take it one step further with the direction of this wild boxing, and let's just make a spider belt. Like, let's make a WBC spider belt, and we have an image of the spider in the front.
Yeah, that's actually a brilliant idea. I'd be down to see that belt for sure. But you know what, you got to give Jake Paul a lot of credit, because I can tell he really does respect Anderson Silva. If you've seen his recent social media content as of late, he's been very complimentary of Silva, really honored to take the fight. So I really hope that all of these shenanigans actually add up to a decent show in Phoenix. And obviously we're over a month away from the fight, but let's see how the rest of the buildup goes, and let's hope that the all access episode that Showtime put together is as good as the initial presser. So we'll see.
Before we get to the UFC Vegas 60 preview, one note we do have to make: Elias Theodorou, former UFC fighter, passed away at age 34 from cancer. Little was known about his cancer diagnosis. Reportedly, Theodorou told very few people about his cancer diagnosis and lived out, his last days, the best that they could. Died surrounded with loved ones. It stinks to see somebody pass away so young, especially from something like cancer. And Theodorou, he was a veteran of the UFC, a veteran of one of the Tough series, had notable wins. He actually, but right before the loss that ended his UFC career, he was putting on a little bit of a winning momentum, winning ways. Elias Theodorou, actually his last fight, I believe it was when he became the first fighter to receive a medical exemption for marijuana, if I'm not mistaken.
That sounds right. And I
Became
also,
was a ring boy for Invicta.
that's true. Is that, and for those of you guys who are clued in, he was also a staple of the MMA Twitter community, super interactive. Is just one of those guys that seemed like he really enjoyed life. So to hear that was significantly shocking, and it seemed like for almost everyone involved in his life, either big or small, he touched a lot of people, and that was just a really shocking a piece of shocking news that no one saw coming. So
Yeah.
may he rest in peace, and truly Canadian MMA lost a really good person. Oh,
Indeed.
my thoughts go out to him and his family, and that is truly a devastating loss, and a loss that I think a lot of people in the MMA community, it's not sitting with them very well, and yeah, it was shocking to see that news, and at first I didn't think it was real, and sure enough, it ended up being legit, and yeah, that's really unfortunate. Hmm.
All right. So now in a few days' time, we will have a UFC fight night. It is UFC Vegas 60, headlined by Corey Sandhagen taking on Song Yadong. Let's see if I can get this up. Okay.
That is a that
Travis.
is a high that is a high level main event for the UFC Fight Night card, as high level as we've seen probably all year when looking back at the other UFC Vegas. This is right up there with one of the best main events that you could have for a straight fight night card with an early start, and it'd be a fantastic fight, as well as the rest of the card, of course. And of course, I would be remiss not to mention that the guy that we always shout out at the end of every episode is also on this card. So shout out Joe Piper, and he's and if there's one fighter that you should tune in for, no bias or anything, we promise, he's the guy for sure.
Mhm.
But to talk about this main event, a massive fight in the bantamweight division. Corey Sandhagen, Song Yadong, been around for a very long time. These two guys have had several fight of the night bonus is between them. They fought some of the best fighters in the sport. I feel like this is a perfect time to make this matchup, and I think whoever wins this fight is going to stay in the upper echelon of the top of the division and move one step closer to a title shot. What are your early impressions of this one?
So Corey Sandhagen, I feel, is kind of this fighter that he can be in the upper echelon of the bantamweight division. He has fought some of the toughest fighters in this bantamweight division, but he will always succeed against some, but not against others. Unfortunately, he's coming off back-to-back losses. He had an impressive run in 2019 when he defeated John Lineker, defeated Rafael Sunsao. He lost to Aljamain Sterling, but then he knocks out Marlon Moraes. He knocks out Frankie Edgar, loses to TJ Dillashaw, a controversial split decision. A few months later, he gets Peter Yan, interim title fight, and he loses that. So this is his first time fighting since that interim title fight a year ago. And for Corey Sandhagen, he puts on a show. Like I mentioned, he's great when he's like a great bantamweight contender. But this is a fight where if he loses, it's gonna be a much tougher road back. Now, as far as Song Yadong goes, he is a fighter that is going to be very dangerous for Mr. Sandhagen. Look at these wins, coming off the wins over Marlon Moraes, a knockout win in his own right, knockout win over Julio Arce, split decision win over Casey Kenny, win over Marlon Chito Vera in 2020, right before Chito Vera beat Sean O'Malley. So Song Yadong has really put a good record in on itself, and I've got a feeling, if Corey Sandhagen is not careful, Song Yadong is going to upbeat him, and it's going to be a long road back for Mr. Sandhagen.
No, I agree, but I want to counter that point and say losing to two former champions back to back is nothing to sweat at. I mean, in
I do
40,
agree. I should say I do agree on that end that Sandhagen basically has the better fight experience of
no,
opponents.
and not to mention the fact that that fight with T.J. Dillashaw last summer was an extremely close fight that was heavily debated amongst several media members, pundits, and fans as to, did Corey Sandhagen get the short end of the stick,
When I was watching live, I said Sandhagen won.
yeah. But yeah, I would say for sure this fight for Yadong is big because if he wins, you're talking about beating a guy who's been in the UFC forever, has fought the best in the division, and without a doubt, this would easily be the biggest name he's ever beat to this point. I know obviously he's beat some others as we've alluded to, but just given who Sandhagen has fought in his last couple fights, this is this fight is a fight for song where if he wins this fight, his next fight is going to be massive, and it's going to be a fight that a lot of people are interested in. And I actually think that if Sean O'Malley loses to Peter Yan and Song Yudong wins this fight, don't be surprised if Sean O'Malley's first fight back in 2023, assuming that those two outcomes happen, is
Song Yudong.
is Song Yudong versus Sean O'Malley. Not trying to play matchmaker too quickly, but stylistically, that's an outstanding fight. And there's a ton of fights you could do in this division that would make the fans happy, and this being one of them. I really don't see how this fight goes the distance. We haven't really jumped into best bets just yet, but I could easily see a finish in this fight for either guy, and I think the safest pick here is to pick this fight to not go the distance. If I were to pick a winner, it's hard for me, but I would say that this is a must win for Sandhagen. I think he edges Song Yudong in this second or third round and stops him, which is super hard to do. I know, but regardless of who wins this main event, it's going to be an action-packed fight from the second the bell rings, and it's going to be a fight that a lot of hardcore fans are excited about, and that if it does deliver, people are going to be talking about it for a long time for sure.
Moving on to the co-main event, Chidi Njokuani, the Bellator veteran, taking on Gregory Rodriguez.
Yeah, this is another fight where both of these guys are looking to continue to work their way up in that division, more specifically middleweight, of course. And I'm hot on the Rodriguez train. I think he wins. I think he wins this fight, and I think he beats him impressively. I actually think that he could win this fight in the first round too. I just think he's better everywhere, and I actually think that he might win by submission.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I mean, Njokuani, he really has the experience when it comes to fighting some decent names. I mean, he once fought Rafael Carvalho. He fought John Salter. He fought Marc-Andre Barriol and has the win over Marc-Andre Barriol. It only took him 16 seconds. Chidi, for his run ever since being on the Contender Series, he's impressed. He is really impressed in his UFC run.
For sure.
And he's going to have a 4-inch reach advantage as well. I know Rodriguez here, he's got the win over Julian Marquez, Jeong Park, Josh Fremd in LFA.
Mm-hmm.
I think I lean towards Njokuani on this one. I think his run continues. He's picked up, he's got the momentum, and I think he'll continue.
I could see it. I could see it going either way. I just think from a recency standpoint, just think that Rodriguez has looked a little bit better, and I actually think that Chidi's best competition. You have to go all the way back to Bellator, and I just don't think he's fought the UFC caliber level of fighters yet to be considered a staple of the division. But maybe a win over Rodriguez does exactly that.
One other fight to mention before we get into our best bets. Andre Fili taking on Bill Algeo. Andre Fili, of course, Andre Fili, a veteran of the UFC, but it's been a rough stretch for him. He's lost to, Joe Anderson Brito, the no contest with Daniel Pineda, lost to Bryce Mitchell, lost to Sadiq Youssef, win over Shaman Moraes, win over Charles Air Jordan, win over Miles Jury. He's faced some decent competition, but he hasn't been able to string success together as of late. He's taking on Bill Algeo, who has the win over Herbert Burns, defeated Joe Anderson Brito, defeated Spike Carlisle. Ricardo Ramos, not a bad loss. Ricardo Lamas, not a bad loss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is one of those fights where I think Fili's back is against the wall. Could you argue, Tom, that if he loses this weekend to Algeo, a Dana White looking for a fight alum, that Fili has the potential of getting cut? Because I would say yes.
Yes, I think so. I don't want him to get cut, but you look at the stretch that Fili has had. You look at the run that Algeo has had. I think that this is setting up for Algeo to ending up taking out Touchy Fili and putting Touchy Fili back into sending him to Bellator, sending him back to the LFA or something. This is as you said, Fili's back is against the wall, and this is a fight that Fili needs to do everything to win, or at least put on a fight of the night kind of showing to convince Dana for him to stick around just for the sake of entertainment. Yeah,
what sucks for Fili is that given his age of him being 32, like this is really his last chance. I mean, this is the last chance to do something significant in this sport. And to do so, he has to put together a string of wins. And although he's a very exciting fighter, and I've never seen him in a boring fight, tell me the last time you saw a boring Andre Fili fight. He needs to put together some wins, and this is a must win. But I really do like Algeo here, just given his recent history and just his ability to finish fights is ultra impressive. So it'll be interesting. There are a couple other fights on this card that I'm looking at. One of them is Rodrigo Nascimento versus Tanner Boser. Again, another guy, Tanner Boser. When's the last time you saw Tanner Boser in a boring fight? You don't see it. This is a fight where I feel like if you're looking at a bet, this fight to go over 1.5 rounds feels like a really smart play, just given their past history as well as Boser's ability to finish fights before the third round. I really like that as a bet, because you aren't picking a side necessarily, but you are saying that you like the length of how the fight will go. So I like that a lot. I also like, and this is for obvious reasons, but how excited are you for Joe Piper's official UFC debut against Alan Amadovsky? And he also made the main card of this event, which good on him. I think he really impressed Dana White that much that he was like, well, yeah, let's put him on the main card.
Joe Piper. And he's taking on a guy who's lost his last 3. Let's call it Zain. This is a setup fight. This is a setup to showcase Joe Piper.
Of course.
There is no doubt about it. So Joe Piper, I think it said for the odds he's a -420. I would say try to find a fight that's not prop. Yeah, an inside the distance prop. I would go with an inside the distance prop on this one.
And I would go to say that I think a Joe Piper knockout is a solid. Hey, what do you think?
I'm for it. I'd go for it.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other fights on this card that interest you?
So one does catch my attention on these prelims here. Actually, there's two of them. So
Okay.
one of them is the prelim headliner, and that being Anthony Hernandez versus Marc-Andre Barriault. So I thought with Marc-Andre Barriault that if Mr. Powerbar, with his last fight, that it was must win for him, that he needed to impress against Jordan Wright. He ends up getting the first round submission, and he ends up, now he's on 1-3 of his last 4, because originally it did not start well for him. Sanchez, Jocko, Park, it looked bad, and now he's 1-3 of 4. And, it's good on him that he's got some momentum on his side. Anthony Hernandez, I would say, is a pretty decent middleweight. Win over Josh Friend back in April. He has the win over Rodolfo Vieira and lost to Kevin Holland in 39 seconds. But, that's Kevin Holland. Not so much of a bad loss. So I think this is a very interesting fight here when it comes to these two. And then in the other prelim fight that I have my eye on, and this is basically, this basically is just me plugging Pat Sabatini. So Pat Sabatini was a senior when I started my time at Ryder, and Pat Sabatini has just looked absolutely, tremendous thus far when it comes to the UFC. I know his path to the UFC actually got interrupted a little bit in the CFFC when he had that nasty looking broken arm during his title fight with James Gonzalez.
I remember that.
It's disgusting. But Tristan Connolly, Tucker Lutz, and TJ Laramie. I don't know why I can't speak anymore. Pat Sabatini has looked really impressive, 4-0 ever since arriving on the scene in the UFC. And this is a fight where, with a win over somebody like Damon Jackson, Pat Sabatini could bring himself to that next level. I'm not talking top 15 just yet, but one to have an eye on that by mid next year, he could be in the top 15.
Oh, I could see it. And given how stacked featherweight is, they're always looking for exciting featherweights, and he's one of them. So that's a big fight. To be honest, for a hardcore fan, this card is low key kind of stacked a little bit. What do you think?
I think so. I think this is one of those low key kind of cards. You also got an interesting pair of women's fights down here on the prelims. You got Aspen Ladd, Sarah McMahon, and you got Maria Agapova taking on Jillian Robertson.
Must win for Sarah McMahon, I might add, too.
I agree. It's a must win for her. I even think Aspen Ladd needs to show something in this fight. I'm not saying with a loss she'd get cut, but I'm saying that she definitely, could use a significant win to increase her stock. So a significant performance. So it'll be interesting to see how those two square off on the prelims.
I think a Trey Ogden money line bet is a solid play on Saturday. What do you think?
Daniel Zaluber, who would he be? I believe he's making this Octagon debut this Saturday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Trey
Ogden fought in front of Dana White. So
I think Ogden is one to keep an eye on, although I wouldn't say it's my favorite bet. But I think if you want to sprinkle Ogden on and parlay him with a couple of the bigger fights on this card, I think I'd be for that.
Do you like any upsets this weekend?
That's a good question.
As you know, the UFC is unpredictable every Saturday. So
for certain, I was looking at the Ngannou and Ngannou Rodriguez fight, but that one's actually pretty near even according to these odds here. Let's see this Trevin Giles versus Luis Coast fight. So Luis Coast is a slight underdog. I think I don't see any underdogs that are my favorite, but if I have to pick one underdog of the week, it might be Coast.
Interesting. And that's a fight that for me personally, I like that fight not to go the distance. How about you?
Yeah, don't go to distance. Does not go to distance. I would put that prop more than an underdog, honestly.
I think there are more fights to not go the distance this weekend than any card that I can remember. I think we're going to see a crap ton of finishes on this 14 fight card, no matter how the fights turn out.
Psst. This is probably going to be one of those cards that you think it sucks on paper, but is going to end up having a lot of good highlight finishes.
Yeah,
Just saying.
Yeah, that's true. Dana White always says it's those cards that sneak up on us that end up being really good. And as you know from watching UFC events on TV that take place from the Apex over the last 2 years, there's some weird aura about it for every single Apex card is just absolutely fantastic. So you never know, we might get another one. But to conclude, you like Coast this week. There are a couple of picks that I like. I really do like this Corey Sandhagen Song Yudong over 1.5 rounds prop. Those would be my two best bets, and then of course we have to sprinkle in the fact that we would like to see Joe Piper win his UFC debut. So if you want to do a parlay of those three, those would be my three picks this week.
I would say Sandhagen over 1.5 rounds. I would actually over Coast. I'm only saying Coast for an underdog bet, but I would put Pat Sabatini over that. I think Pat Sabatini really is somebody to keep your eye out on at featherweight. And then what was the other bet that we said that you just said before? Joe Piper.
Joe Piper, of course. Yeah.
I would stack those together.
Interesting. Yeah, so I'm sure that if you stack those together, that parlay is pretty solid, and hopefully you're not like Yanni DeGree's recent run where he's only won like 2 picks out of his 20 tries. But who knows? It'll be interesting to see how the rest of his year goes profit wise. But I digress. Is there? I guess the one final thing that I will say is in case you weren't aware, we're getting to the end of a very long stretch of events for the UFC before they take a little bit of a break in a couple of weeks. What has been your favorite card over the last 6 or 7 weeks as we wind down into the middle of September, where the UFC is going to take a bit of a hiatus?
Last 6 or 7 weeks. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to do the math of all the weeks in my head. Was that 10 for 10 finishes? Vegas 59. Was that in that range?
I believe so. Yes.
I have to go with that one. I mean, 10 for 10 finishes. That was just unbelievable. You don't see that every day.
Yeah, I would say 10 for 10 card was great. UFC 278 was insane. Pretty much ever since we've started this podcast, every single card has been like over 7.5 out of 10, which is pretty good. I'm not sure if it's our positive juju that we bring every week or what, but it's almost like every card has something crazy. I'm not saying that we're directly influencing the UFC every week, but there's something brewing every Saturday that makes every
spreading
card,
the juju.
Hey, there's just something every Saturday that makes every card seem significantly better than the last one. But that was a really solid episode. Again, a lot in combat sports to digest this weekend. The two big things we want you guys to focus on. Oh, one other thing, a programming note for UFC Vegas 60 this weekend. For those of you in the United States, it's an early start on the East Coast, and it's exclusively on ESPN Plus. The entire card, all 13 fights, are on ESPN Plus. And you can flip over to the on pay-per-view. I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, the pay-per-view start for Golovkin Canelo 3 is a 9 p.m. Eastern start, so you can make sure to go and watch that. But before we get out of here, make sure to like and subscribe, share the MMA Outsiders everywhere. And I'm Zain Bando. I'm a staff writer at bjpen.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at ZainBando99, where I tweet everything from Illinois takes, the MMA stuff about the Bears, everything else. You can also follow our Twitter and Instagram accounts for this exact show at the MMA Outsiders and at the MMA Outsiders ETV, depending on which platform you are on. You can also follow Tom at Inside MMA, as he's a contributor over there. And on his Twitter accounts, there's two, Tom Talks Sports 9 and of course at Thomas J. Albano. Over that, I'm Bando. He's Albano. We're going to be back next week to cover everything that was UFC Vegas 60, Canelo and Golovkin, and anything else that happens in this crazy world of combat sports. Tom, is there anything you'd like to conclude with for this episode?
Be Joe Piper.
Be Joe Piper.
Watch Joe Piper.
And watch Joe Piper this weekend. If there's one fight that Tom and I are forcing you to watch, it is Joe Piper's UFC debut. We don't want to hear online, oh, I missed it, I couldn't find it. If that is our unofficial tagline for this show. We expect every single one of you to watch every single Joe Piper fight, no matter how long it takes.
All right. We will see everybody next week. Take care.
Take care.